"Step aside, old man," shouted Lieutenant Martin, and without waiting for a reply, raised his foot. The blow landed directly on the chest of the gray-haired man, dressed in a formal uniform. The papers clutched tightly in his hands, scattered like a fan. Silence filled the room, so dense it was possible to hear the metal on his Ardensky ribbon sway slightly, then remained still. The elder did not retreat. He merely staggered, as if an ancient oak faced a gust of wind. He straightened up, pressed the trembling metal against his chest, and looked steadily at the young officer. No words or gestures, only a calm and piercing gaze. Near the doorway, the court secretary whimpered softly. The judge raised his eyebrows but said nothing. The hearing was internal. Only officials were present, and no one intervened. Martin stepped forward, preparing to strike again. His face burned not so much with anger, but with a sense of smug satisfaction. He was used to believing that youth and rank granted the right to disregard age and decorum. Captain Lewis stood nearby, but he too did not move. The gray-haired man slowly bent down, picked up one of the papers, and standing up, extended it toward the secretary. Her hands trembled as she placed the sheet on the desk. It was an incoming registration form, seemingly trivial, but marked urgently in red. The lieutenant crushed his cap in his fingers, convinced that procedures were beneath respect. "Who do you think you are to act so arrogantly here?" he spat. The elder remained silent, his lips motionless. He simply stepped toward the podium where documents were supposed to be presented. The commander, retired Major General Alex Nichols Volgan, addressed the Zelyarsky garrison. He intended to give a statement, but the words were never uttered. "I ask you, Martin," he said, gripping the old man by the shoulder. The coat was dry and clean. The fabric rustled beneath his fingers. The old man turned his head. His face showed neither resentment nor anger. His eyes held the steady patience of someone who had seen war and understood the cost of noise. The judge cleared his throat. "Enjoy the viewing. Let us find out where we are being observed from. Comment below and subscribe. Lieutenant, maintain order." But it was too late. Another document, a sealed envelope, appeared on the secretary's desk. The secretary glanced at it, paled, then stood and handed the packet to the judge. The judge cut open the edge, pulled out a sheet, and scanned it quickly. The room remained silent. "Read it aloud?" the judge asked quietly. The old man nodded. The judge rose. His voice was dry, without inflection. "By order of the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs, retired Major General Alex Nichols Volgan is appointed head of the Internal Security Department of the Main Directorate for the Zelyarsky region. The order takes effect immediately." Martin recoiled. The smirk faded from his face. He glanced down at his boots, at the polished toe which he had just struck a moment before. The metal on the old man's chest swayed once again, as if confirming the statement. The secretary brought out a second sheet. "The signatures are here," she whispered. The judge stamped it. The order was received and registered. The old man, now head of the Internal Security Department, lifted his gaze to the lieutenant. There was no judgment in his eyes. Only a quiet indifference surrounded the man who valued duty more than personal offense. "Lieutenant Martin," stated the judge firmly, "you are temporarily relieved of all duties until the investigation concludes. Remove your holster and hand over your badge." The door slammed, and the duty officer entered. Without hesitation, he unclasped Martin's holster from his belt and placed it carefully on the table. The lieutenant glanced around, evidently confused. The metallic clang echoed louder than any shout. The old man silently gathered the fallen papers and arranged them neatly into a stack. Not a single crease on his uniform had changed. He moved to the judge's desk and left a signal sheet for immediate consideration. The secretary noted down the number. The next document was an official telegram. "Begin execution. Verify the entire staff of the administration. Deadline 7 days." Not a sound followed. Even a heartbeat would have felt too loud. The old man turned and exited into the corridor. The courtroom remained immersed in complete silence. A dim floor lamp glowed faintly in the hallway. A constant draft usually swept through the loose window frames in the corridor. Yet today, the gaps were silent, as if the building itself held its breath. The duty officer walked half a step behind Volgan. The lieutenant followed without his weapon, striving to keep his back straight, though every heel strike resonated hollowly in his chest, like a bell of shame. Volgan did not quicken his pace. He paused at each post, handing over a new badge. The sentries accepted it, bowed respectfully, and opened doors. No words were exchanged, only the sounds of stamping and muted replies when they stepped into the inner courtyard. Martin noticed for the first time how much whiteness had appeared at the temples of the old man. In the sunlight, it looked like snow, lingering stubbornly despite the arrival of spring. Yet the general's back remained straight. His step was steady and heavy, the gait of a man accustomed to holding his formation. "Where are we headed?" the lieutenant finally breathed out. "Your department?" the general replied. He glanced up at the sky as if checking the time and added, "The inspection starts today." The internal department was housed in the adjacent building. There, a square safe stood in the reception area. On its lid rested some folders. Volgan picked up the top one and checked the stamp on the spine. "Do not advance this matter." He flipped open the cover and scanned the first page. "Are you listed as the person responsible here?" he asked quietly. The lieutenant's face grew even paler. "That is an old duty roster. I was told the complaint was groundless." "Who told you?" The general turned the page and pointed to the signature of the shift supervisor, the exact one who was on duty today when the order of suspension was issued. "Major Kolesnikov. So he is the first one we summon." Volgan set the folder aside and took up the next one. It was thicker, and the stamp had been corrected by hand to say confidential. The general frowned. Was the classification removed? "No," whispered the lieutenant. "So someone removed it without permission." "Fine." The general signed a short note in red ink demanding an urgent internal investigation. "The report must be on my desk by morning." The secretary quietly took the order and disappeared. "How many such folders are there?" the general asked. "About 20 at the moment," admitted the lieutenant. "Bring all of them." He turned to Captain Lewis standing nearby. "Maintain control." Lewis straightened up. Confirmed. The sun disappeared behind the roof. A damp chill crept through the courtyard. Yet Volgan did not move until he was certain every courier who had entered through the grated gate had left their documents and departed. The general's observant eyes caught every signature and every date. When the last folder was placed on the pile, he nodded as if to signal the section was complete. No unprotected materials would spend the night here. "Lewis, carry the safe to the investigation room. Lock it with 2 locks. Give me the keys." The lieutenant stood with lowered eyes. He braced for a reprimand, but the old man did not raise his voice. He spoke evenly, sometimes whispering. Yet each word hit like a nail. While the captain and his assistants lifted the safe, Volgan slowly walked alongside the long table where the duty officers recorded entries into the log. He placed his finger on a line marked with black ink bearing the name Saveliev. Grigory Arkadyevich, dated 15 years ago. "Is this person still active?" he asked. "Discharged due to health reasons," the duty officer replied, avoiding eye contact. The address was recorded in the file. Volgan swiftly tore the page from the log, folded it, and slipped it into his breast pocket. "Verify that. We will check tomorrow." The evening sky turned gray. Official vehicles had already transported some of the staff home. The general faced Martin. "Lieutenant, you are not detained, but you may only move freely within the department." Your steps will be monitored by the duty officer." "Understood, Comrade General," Martin answered quietly. The words fell like a stone into a well. No splash, only silence. A ripple of anticipation spread across the water. They stepped into the hallway. Since ancient times, the partition walls held the scent of varnish paint and aged files. Time here felt tangible. Every footstep echoed with the past, like the distant toll of a church bell. On a windless day, Volgan stopped by the window and glanced at the lamp that had just lit up in the courtyard. The light was steady and warm, yet one could already sense the shadows cast by the impending inspection. He turned to the lieutenant. "Tomorrow you will come to my office and tell me everything you know, without going into details or making excuses. Speak plainly as it is. Do you understand?" "Yes, Comrade General. If I withhold even one thing..." Volgan did not finish the sentence. His look alone made words unnecessary. "Raise everyone for immediate alert," General Volgan quietly ordered the next morning, while standing at the administration building's entrance. His tone forbade any hustle, but every staff member understood that hesitation would not go unnoticed. By 8 o'clock, officers from all departments had formed lines in the assembly hall. They stood in straight rows, as if recalling their basic training. Arms straight at their sides, eyes fixed forward. Only the occasional cough broke the silence. Until the very last moment, the purpose of the meeting remained unknown. When Volgan finally stepped up to the podium, Captain Lewis brought out a metal box secured with 2 locks. He placed it in front of a row of chairs, faced the formation, and stood at attention. "Open it," the general commanded. The keys clicked, the lid lifted, revealing a stack of folders. Resting on top was a white envelope sealed with the state emblem. Lewis handed it to General Volgan. He tore off the edge, pulled out a short sheet, and without any introduction began to read aloud. "To restore order, I hereby command that all previously discontinued disciplinary cases be considered reopened. Until the completion of the internal investigations, the authorities of the individuals listed in the attachment are temporarily suspended." He lowered his gaze and flipped through the attachment, where the names appeared in a continuous column. Then he raised his eyes. "Those whose names are called are suspended immediately." People nearby escorted them to the investigation office. The secretary started reading the names aloud. With each name, one person stepped out of line, removed their holster, and handed over their ID. The footsteps on the wooden floor echoed loudly, but nobody spoke. The 4th called was Lieutenant Martin. Just yesterday confident, now his face had paled so much that bluish shadows appeared under his eyes. He handed over his pistol without trembling, but his fingers clenched when the holster touched the table. The general gestured towards the empty row of chairs by the wall. The suspended gathered separately. Nearby stood Major Lewis, also named in the list. He appeared to be trying to maintain composure, but the collar of his uniform stuck to his neck, and tiny drops of sweat gleamed on his temples. When all names were read, the general nodded to the secretary. "That is enough." He slowly scanned the hall. "Friends," he began, and his voice carried no threat or reproach. "Service is a duty, not a privilege. We wear the uniform to protect people, not for our personal benefit. Offenses, even if old, must be corrected. The era of carelessness is over." He reached out to the drawer and pulled out a folder, opened to its center. Inside was a complaint filed 7 years ago. At that time, it was deemed repetitive and closed without any explanation. The statement claimed that an officer used force against a detained teenager. The officer faced no consequences, and the case was forgotten. He closed the folder. From this moment on, everyone on that shift must provide an explanation. He took a deep breath. "You have 24 hours. Reports must be on my desk by 9 in the morning tomorrow. Failure to appear or dishonesty will result in dismissal without the possibility of reinstatement." The pause lasted only a second, but the silence felt endless. "Dismissed." The officers dispersed down the hallways, their footsteps fading in the distance. Those suspended were escorted upstairs, where the old archive room had been converted into a temporary investigation headquarters. By noon, the general's office resembled a sorting center. Piles of explanations grew on the desk. Alex Nichols Volgin stood nearby, fingers lightly touching the spine of each folder, like a doctor taking a pulse. Captain Lewis entered, reporting that the interrogation protocol for Major Kolesnikov was ready. He claimed not to remember the circumstances around the complaint closure. The general said, "If he doesn't remember, then he cannot serve. Memory is an officer's weapon." Lewis nodded and left. Behind the door, a quiet conversation began. The general caught his own name spoken within a question. Why him? But the answer was swallowed by the click of a lock. The secretary brought in a new stack of letters. Volgin took the top envelope. The signature was angular and clear. G.A. Savliev, an old acquaintance. Address: the village of Mostovaya. He smiled slightly, the corners of his mouth lifting gently. His facial features softened. Immediately, they sent the courier to Mostovaya. "Take this to the legal advisor," said the secretary as she recorded it. It was done. The general sat down and opened the letter. Inside were 2 paragraphs written in neat handwriting. Savlev explained he had resigned not because of illness, but due to pressure from his superiors. The young Lieutenant Martin at that time had threatened to expel his son from the Suvorov military school if Savlev did not sign his resignation letter. The letter was dated 7 years earlier. Volgin circled the line with a red pencil. He took out a thin folder from the drawer, placed the letter inside, and closed it. In the evening, the duty officer reported the situation. Most of the staff had gone home, but the documents kept arriving. The stairwell smelled of paper and dust. Only those awaited for inspection remained in the building. Valery Martin sat in the former archive. A blank sheet lay before him. His hand holding the pencil trembled. The general's phrase kept turning in his mind without details or excuses. He looked up and noticed an old clock above the desk. The quiet ticking of the second hand was nerve-wracking. His thought whispered, "Write the truth. It will be easier." But another voice hissed back, "The truth will cost you everything." He lowered the pencil and rubbed the bridge of his nose as the clock ticked. The door slightly opened. Volgin entered. There was no hint of reproach in his voice. "It is hard to write, isn't it, Comrade General? Try to begin with the very first time someone violated the regulations. Sometimes starting is half the battle." He left without slamming the door. The lieutenant looked at the sheet and wrote 2 words, "I am." Guilt weighed on him before he erased it. Night was descending upon the city. The old lamps in the courtyard glowed with a yellowish hue. Moths fluttered against their glass panes like the spirits of unspoken confessions. In the adjacent room, Major Martin sat at the investigator's desk. In front of him lay a printed report. Nearby, a recorder flashed a red light. Investigator Lewis, young but keen, flipped through the pages, glancing up only to clarify details. "Do you recognize these signatures?" he asked calmly. "Are they mine?" "Yes," responded the major, "but my memory is hazy. Too much time has passed." Lewis neither smiled nor frowned. 7 years is not long enough to forget. Try to recall why there was a note stating the complaint was dismissed after a repeated review. If there was no review. Major rubbed his forehead. The room smelled of old paper and faint valerian. He could hear chairs creaking beyond the wall. Other officers were providing explanations. Outside the window, the night road hummed quietly. "I was ordered to," he finally said. The then deputy in charge of staffing claimed everything was settled. Lewis lifted his pen. "Deputy Colonel Tarasov. He is retired now. We will summon him tomorrow." Lewis switched off the recorder. "Please sign the report. Tomorrow, there will be a confrontation." The major trembled, but managed to sign his name. When the door closed, he sat down, pressing his temples. He recalled Tarasov, strong, clean-shaven, with a commanding voice. Tarasov has lived in Kaliningrad for years, but reportedly visits on business. The thought stuck in his mind. A confrontation means the end. At that moment, General Volgin descended into the basement where the old archives were stored. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood. He switched on the only lamp in the room. On the bottom shelf rested a box labeled Personal Files from the 1990s. He pulled out a folder containing a service report dated to the year Martin had just started his career. The cover sheet bore a note reading, "Training completed. Recommend for leadership position." The general ran his fingers over the lines, as if trying to read between them. Once he had been a young lieutenant, too. Back then, instructors repeated, "Words and honor are all that remain when you remove your epaulets." Some students remembered this, others forgot. Now those who had forgotten needed to be taught once again. Volgin closed the folder and sighed. Footsteps echoed in the silent basement like the beat of a drum. He turned off the lamp and climbed the stairs. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving darkness and the smell of old paper below. The morning began without the usual call from the wake-up horn. Instead, employees were roused by a terse directive posted on the notice board. Meeting of the leadership team at 7 o'clock. The corridors hummed quieter than usual. People moved in small groups, trying not to speak. In the conference room, the air felt stale despite the wide-open windows. Thin envelopes addressed to each department head lay on the tables. As the participants took their seats, General Volgin stood by the regional map with his hands behind his back. His face wore the calmness of a summer morning, but his gaze locked onto everyone who entered. When the clock struck 7, he began. Martin nodded to the secretary. The door closed behind him. The people seated opened their envelopes simultaneously and inhaled sharply. Inside were instructions to inspect each department. Deadlines were specified, lists of cases outlined, and responsible officers appointed, all chosen from outside the previous leadership. "Any questions?" the general asked. The room filled with the rustling of papers and complete silence. No one raised a hand. "Then let's begin," he said. He explained the procedure. Each person would review unresolved cases, identify irregularities, and report back. Personal connections and past merits do not justify leniency. If anyone has doubts about their own actions, the general added, submit a report today. Voluntary admission will reduce liability. He spoke calmly without threats or raised voice, yet each word rang out like a bell toll, reaching even the farthest streets. After the meeting, Major Kolesnikov stood up. Though he was not under arrest, his limited freedom felt like ticking hours. He approached the door as if to leave, but stopped and returned to the general. "Comrade General," his voice faltered, but he gathered himself. "I want to provide additional testimony, not in writing." Volgin nodded. "Investigator Kornilov is in room 15. Speak only the truth." Kolesnikov lowered his eyes. "Thank you," he said, and left. Later that day, a courier arrived from Mostovaya. He brought a squared notebook sheet bearing a large, clear handwriting. "General Volgin, thank you. I am too weak to come in person, but I am ready to give testimony by phone. I will be home in the morning." Signed, Savelyev. The general placed the letter into the very folder, marked with the red stamp, and then summoned the secretary. "Arrange the negotiations over the secure line at 700 in the morning. Strictly," he ordered. "Understood," came the reply. Meanwhile, the suspended officers kept composing their explanations. Lieutenant Martin was filling out his third page. The lines became uneven. After prolonged strain, his fingers lost strength. Fatigue seeped through the words. The deputy had said so. That was how it was decided. He knew it was not an excuse. He provided examples of how cases had been closed, mentioning dates and names. When the page was finished, Captain Lewis entered. Without glancing at the text, he said, "The General expects your explanation by 6. We'll make it. Remember, lies will be uncovered. Savlev is ready to speak." Martin shuddered. He was waiting for the call. The captain left. At 5:45, General Volgin sat in his office. Before him lay the envelope from Martin. The old man did not open it immediately. First, he switched on the desk lamp and straightened the sheet of paper. Then he unfolded it and began to read. Every line seemed to wash away the dirt. The lieutenant wrote clearly, "I admit to unjustified use of force against a teenager. Admit to unlawful pressure on Savlev," and detailed the quiet dismissal scheme. At the end, he asked not for leniency, but for an honest investigation. The general took a pen and marked the date of receipt, then stood and walked to the window. Outside, the summer evening blurred the rooftops, yet clouds gathered in the sky. Volgin thought about how, during the war, people acknowledged guilt differently, without documents, in battle. But peaceful life demanded paperwork. He closed the window and sat down. He reached for the phone but stopped himself. First, let's verify, then make the call. The internal phone on the desk rang. "Comrade General, Investigator Kornilov is requesting your presence in room 15. On my way." The 15th room was narrow and windowless. An old storage space had been converted into a temporary office. On the table sat a desk lamp and 2 chairs. Major Kolesnikov occupied one chair, while Kornilov with a recorder sat in the other. "Were you summoned?" Volgin asked. "The Major wants to make a statement in your presence," the investigator replied. The general nodded toward Kolesnikov. "I was promoted. I concealed the materials," he said softly. "By order of Lieutenant Colonel Tarasov, he received an early rank. I have money at home that was given back then. It is in the dresser drawer. I am prepared to return it and sign a waiver of pension benefits." The words came with difficulty, yet he spoke them. Volgin listened without interruption, and then said, "You will sign everything with Kornilov and send the address for the search. Until court decides, you remain under a written pledge." Kolesnikov lowered his shoulders. Understood. The night was quiet in the corridor. The general was returning to his office with Kolesnikov's folder in hand. 1 or 2 lights were on in the hallway, but that was enough. Something rustled in the darkness. Volgin stopped. A young security sergeant emerged from the shadows. "Comrade General, permission to speak. There is a footprint on your office door, as if someone tried to kick it open." The general nodded. "Remove it. Record it in the logbook, but do not take a soul sample. It is useless. The guilty party will reveal themselves." The sergeant nodded and left. Volgin sat down at the desk in the office. The table held the folder belonging to Kolesnikov, placed beside Martin's envelope. Then he opened the drawer and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. He wrote, "Report. I request to be appointed as the head of the investigative actions myself." He signed it, added the date, and then took out a stack of letters that had been awaiting replies since the morning. He answered each with 2 or 3 sentences. "We will accept the statement. We will check." The paper rustled softly like grass, swaying in the wind. When the clock showed 1:30, Volgin stood up and switched off the lamp. In the hallway, the light glowed dimly. He stepped out and gently closed the door behind him. The building seemed to breathe slowly, as if preparing for a long confession. By the stairs, Captain Lewis caught up with him. "Comrade General, permission to report. Lieutenant Colonel Tarasov has arrived from Kaliningrad." "Good," Volgin replied. "Let him rest for 2 hours. We start the interrogation at 4 o'clock. Let him find his way back to his conscience." The captain opened his mouth as if to ask something, but then closed it. No questions were necessary. At 4 in the morning, in the same 15th room, Tarasov sat waiting. He was taller than Kolesnikov, but hunched over. His keel had slightly lost shape during the trip. A glass of water stood in front of him, next to a folder signed by himself. The general entered and took a seat opposite him. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said calmly, "the confessions of the subordinates have been recorded. Give your testimony, and perhaps you will leave here without handcuffs." Tarasov adjusted his tie. His voice was hoarse from the journey. "What exactly interests you?" "The order by which you closed the case on abuse of power in Martin's department and the financial transfers. From the Culture and Sports Fund to your account." Martin exhaled deeply. "I never expected this matter to resurface, but now it has." The recorder clicked on and the testimony dragged on. Martin recalled amounts, dates, and names. He spoke without trying to twist the story in his favor. His voice trembled. When the recording ended, Volgin stood up. "Lieutenant Colonel, you will remain in the local detention center until the trial. Your spouse will be informed. Everything is according to the law, and without unnecessary attention." Martin nodded silently, no longer asking questions. The general stepped into the corridor. The eastern window was already brightening. The day was beginning. The dusty office with an old metal cabinet greeted General Volgin with a coolness and the scent of paper. He opened the door. The top shelves were empty. Only on the middle shelf, slightly deeper, lay 3 thick folders. Years had blurred the labels, but one bold stamp, "Do not proceed," was still legible. Volgin took out the folders and placed them on the desk before sitting down. The first folder was titled, "Reports on Missing Evidence." The elderly officer slowly flipped through the pages. Behind every phrase of loss for unknown reasons lay the fate of another person. He read without expression. Only his fingers unconsciously revealed his nerves. A slight tremor appeared when a name familiar from service showed up. He carefully wrote down a list of 22 surnames without any smudges. Then, pressing the internal communication button, he briefly said, "Summon Captain Semenov." The captain entered and stood at attention, but his eyes betrayed anxiety. "Semenov," Volgin quietly said, "receive your orders. 22 investigations, a deadline of 3 days. It is assigned. Comrade General, calmly, no rush. People are tired of waiting." Martin nodded, took the list, and left. Volgin opened the second folder. Inside were reports of unauthorized resignations by district officers in small villages. Each declaration bore the same handwriting. The reason presented was family circumstances. The general marked 6 dates that matched complaints from residents about illegal searches. A new order was issued to summon all 6 for face-to-face confrontations. The third folder was thicker. A red wax stamp on the cover read, "Confidential." Volgin untied the old string, flipped to the first page, and saw a long list of stolen weapons, sealed for 7 years. At the end, there was a signature from Martin, who was still a senior sergeant at the time. The general lowered his gaze. He remembered the name Kruglov, the fallen patrolman, and a date matching one item on the list. He stood up and approached the direct line phone. "Comrade Colonel Ivanov." "Yes, I am listening. You see before you the archive on Kruglov's case. Immediately." "Understood. Alex Nichols Volgin." Within an hour, a colonel stood in the office holding a slim folder. Volgin quietly flipped through the documents. It was confirmed. Kruglov's service pistol appeared on the stolen list, but the case was closed with no conclusions. The general set the papers aside. "Ivanov, prepare a report. I will sign the authorization to open a new investigation. We will do it. Also, find Kruglov's wife. She deserves the truth." The colonel left. The general closed the cabinet, leaving the door slightly ajar. Behind it, an empty shelf was visible. He gazed at it as if it symbolized something more. A chasm swallowed others' pleas for assistance. Late at night, he sat at a desk illuminated by a solitary lamp. On the table lay 4 blank sheets of paper. Orders for department rotations, inventory checks, returns of unlawfully written-off materials, and bans on destroying archives. He signed each document and placed them into envelopes. Each signature felt like a hammer's strike. Then there was a knock at the door. A young senior carpenter entered, holding a torn envelope. On the ragged edge stood the word "Warning" in red. Inside lay a broken button from a uniform. Martin glanced at it, recognizing the emblem, a junior officer's insignia. Quietly, he said, "Close the door." The carpenter understood and left. Martin lifted the button, clutching it tightly in his palm. Outside in the corridor, footsteps fell silent. He glanced at his watch. 5 minutes to midnight. Beyond the building's walls, the city slept, but inside the command center, a new day was beginning when old debts returned. He placed the button alongside the files, gently, as if guarding proof. Then he switched off the lamp. In the reception area, an elderly sergeant was on duty. Spotting Martin, he stood up. Martin nodded respectfully. "Good night." "Good night to you too, Comrade General." A warm breeze drifted along the corridor from outside. The windows stood open. The night's coolness trembled slightly, as if it could hardly believe the walls that had witnessed a decade of silence were finally hearing the word inspection. Martin stepped out into the yard. There were no lamps, only faint glimmers from the windows. He breathed in the air mixed with dust and the scent of linden flowers. Somewhere far away, a solitary vehicle passed by. The bus came to a halt, its engine quieted. Volgan glanced up at the sky, where a single star dimly shone. He reflected on those whose names would soon appear in the new reports, then slowly lowered his head. Tomorrow, he would have to face the weary pages once more. He returned inside, passed through his office door, and sat at his desk. Opening a blank notebook, he began writing the first sentence of a new report addressed to the minister. The beginning must be modest, yet not a single forgotten case could be disregarded. Placing the pen down, he closed his eyes briefly and heard a distant door click in the hallway. More files arrived during the night. The morning started without unnecessary words. Exactly at 7 o'clock, the general entered the small hall where the heads of investigation teams waited. He handed each of them an envelope. Inside was a list of names and dates. No one asked why some of the cases dated back several years. People looked into Volgan's eyes and understood. This is not about camaraderie, but a matter of duty. By 10 o'clock, the first summons were underway regarding the listed cases. A captain from the medical service, a woman around 40 with a stern expression, entered the general's office. She reported, "The hospital archive contains photographs of bruises on detainees, matching the incidents attributed to Martin's department." "How many?" Volgan asked calmly. 17 cases, Comrade General. The dates and numbers match." "Enter them," he ordered briefly. The doctor left. The general redrew the table. The left column showed victims' surnames. On the right, the ranks of officers who conducted the arrests. 3 names repeated, one of them being Martin. At noon, Senior Sergeant Knyazev entered the office carrying a torn cardboard box. Inside, there were videotapes and audio recordings. The tapes had yellowed with age, yet the labels were still legible. The label read, "Room 3, Interrogation Without Protocol." The sergeant cleared his throat. "These come from the old storage on the 3rd floor. The key was found in the safe where they kept the penalty tokens." "Thank you," said Volgan. "Make an inventory and assign security to the room." The door closed behind him. The general ran his hand over the tapes. He did not play them immediately. He knew he would encounter a dark corridor and hear foreign screams, but the main event had already taken place. The silent recordings had finally been brought to light. At 1 o'clock, Colonel Ivanov arrived. His face showed no sign of hope. He reported that during the initial archive inspection, an order was found to write off 30 carbines, supposedly for disposal, but there was no disposal act. The paper was signed by the former deputy chief of the headquarters and countersigned by the same Martin. "Where is the deputy chief?" the general asked. "Retired, living in a sanatorium near Samara. Should we invite him officially?" Ivanov nodded and left. By 4 o'clock, the door opened without knocking. An elderly woman stood in the doorway. Volgin recognized her as the widow of Krugli. She bowed and entered slowly, clutching her handbag. The general offered her a chair. "If only you knew how many years I have been knocking," she said quietly. "But at least now, someone listens." "We are listening now," he replied. She pulled out a letter from her husband, written on the eve of his death. In the letter, he stated that he intended to report to the leadership about the missing weapons from the arsenal. Volgin. He received the letter with both hands as if it were a sacred relic. This was significant. "We will attach the letter to the file." He stood up. "Thank you," he said. The woman rose. Her face showed no tears, only exhaustion. She bowed and then left. Alone now, the general placed the letter beneath the glass on his desk. It had become evidence. At dusk, when the shadow stretched longer, the door suddenly opened and 2 guards escorted Lieutenant Martin inside. He stood upright, though his eyes betrayed confusion. The general nodded to the guards who remained by the door. Martin faced the desk directly. Alex Nichols Volgin lifted the first folder, where the lieutenant's signature appeared most often. He opened it at random, displaying a page containing the resignation letter of District Officer Igorov. "Why was he forced to write this?" Volgin asked. Martin's chin trembled, but he answered, "The plan. The indicators were lacking. And what about this list pistol?" The general flipped through the papers, then said, "They demanded reports on losses and squeezed it out." "Who demanded it?" Volgin inquired. "Colonel Gromov, write it down," the general ordered the guards. They noted the name. The questioning deepened. The inquiries came steadily, without pressure. Yet the young officer sweated. For every answer, Volgin opened a new folder, a new sheet, and a fresh signature. After an hour, the general said, "Enough. Take him to the detention cell." Martin was led away. The door closed softly behind him. Volgin moved toward the window. A heavy sunset loomed over the city. The sun set slowly yet assuredly, like people's faith in truth after a long night. He returned to the desk and scribbled a resolution. Place under special control within the investigative department. The clock showed 20:05. He took a button, placed it in his pocket, and stepped into the corridor. Outside the cassette storage room, 2 soldiers were standing guard. The general asked, "Is everything quiet?" "Quiet, Comrade General," came the reply. "Take care of the key," he instructed. Then he moved on. The same elderly sergeant was on duty in the reception area. The general paused and said, "Nicholas Andrew, go home and rest. The night will be calm." "Thank you, Comrade General, but I will stay. I want to see your words become law," he responded. Lewis nodded. The sergeant's reply held more courage than many reports from his superiors. The general returned to his office, sat down, opened his notebook, and wrote, "Reform begins with a single step. Old evils fear documents with signatures more than the noise of the square." The night dragged slowly while the building's windows glowed with light. People read lists, prepared materials, and marked the numbers of lost pieces of evidence. Not a single unnecessary word was spoken. Everyone understood that the time for excuses had ended. By midnight, 3 more folders arrived. The covers read, "Do not betray the document." The general sighed, settled in comfortably, and opened the first folder. He was finishing the last page when suddenly the building shook from a distant rumble. The watchman reported a short circuit in the basement. The general went down himself, The alarm was only a spark in the electrical room. But amidst the smell of burning, he saw a box with charred papers. The edges were still smoldering. He bent down, picked up a scorched sheet, and made out the name Skvortsov. "Seal the room, call the firefighters, conduct an investigation," he said calmly. Returning to his office, Volgin wrote a new resolution. Attempt. The folder grew, but the fear diminished. Fear shifted sides. Now it resided with those who were accustomed to hiding behind empty words. Outside, a gray dawn began. Birds cautiously tested their voices. The first footsteps of the morning shift echoed in the corridor. Only then did the general close the last folder, straighten his back, and quietly tell himself, "This is just the beginning." 3 unsigned notes were placed on the general's desk. The first one warned to stop or lose everything. The second was a torn newspaper page with the words, "You are next," cut out. The third was a black playing card painted with ink. He set them down next to a button without saying a word. Plotnikov reported that the security had detained a person in the corridor without a pass. The individual carried a key to the electrical panel and a lighter. The interrogation revealed he was a former junior officer dismissed a month ago. "Who gave the order?" the head of operations asked. The man said he was handed an envelope through an acquaintance, but did not name the source. They reported this to the general, who remained calm. He called a meeting. Maps of the districts where weapons were previously written off lay on the table. Volgin drew a line from the armory to the garage, from the garage to the warehouse, and from the warehouse back to the write-offs. The line formed a loop. In the center of the loop was the name Gromov. He issued orders: strengthen the posts, seal the garages, and summon auditors. Each command was like tightening a belt, making the loop narrower. By noon, an analysis of the burned papers arrived. The documents had been destroyed 5 hours earlier and set on fire using gasoline from a service canister. The batch number of the gasoline matched the refueling at the testing site, where Major Drozdov was in command. Drozdov was summoned immediately. The major entered with a firm and confident demeanor. The general did not raise his voice. "Major, who authorized your access to the fuel storage?" The major replied, "The storage is open for vehicles. The procedure is standard." The general countered, "The procedure is standard, yet a fuel can went missing." "Did you sign the issuance form?" "It was signed by Warrant Officer Kiselev." "Kiselev will be brought in." Meanwhile, a call from the hall announced the arrival of the widow of Korochkin, a former technician. She handed over her late husband's notebook. It contained 3 pages filled with dates, vehicle numbers, and Drozdov's signatures. The general did not comment but flipped through and handed them to the major. The major's eyelids twitched. "Will you be submitting a statement?" Alex Nichols Volgin asked softly. Drozdov remained silent. Then the general ordered a guard to escort him to a separate room until the investigation's verdict. By evening, a palpable silence settled over the building. Along the corridor, soldiers stood watch. Old lamps crackled softly, and reports arrived every 20 minutes. The office was in order. The archive was locked and being scanned under guard. Suddenly, a dull ringing came from the reception window. A stone shattered the glass, but the security managed to detain the messenger. The messenger turned out to be a teenager from a neighboring yard. He confessed that small sums were paid to deliver the envelope. Inside was another threat. The general commanded to summon the boy's parents, to recount all incoming and outgoing personnel lists, and to install cameras. Yet he stopped abruptly. Instead of cameras, patrols were stationed at the doors. No equipment, only watchful eyes. Much more reliable this way. The medical unit doctor reported 2 operative officers. They were served unidentified pastries in the cafeteria. Both immediately felt pain. The poisoning was mild, but the symptom raised concern. The cafeteria was closed and samples were collected. The on-duty team moved through the corridors and sniffed the air. No foreign odors were detected, but alertness increased. Rumors spread slowly yet persistently. People whispered about why the headquarters suddenly felt like a fortress. Some speculated, while others simply followed commands. The general understood that fear could become an ally if directed properly. He summoned the communications major and ordered him to send a clear telegram to the districts. All citizen appeals are being reviewed again. Non-compliance is grounds for dismissal. Signed, Volgin. During the night, he was handed a sheet with a sketch of an attack plan on the general's convoy. The drawing was rough, pencil-made, but the date was set for tomorrow. He did not change the route. Instead, he simply moved the driver to the armored personnel carrier's wheel and sat beside him. The vehicle traversed the streets without stopping. The harsh courtyard lights peeked out like watchful eyes. Yet, no shots were fired. Fear. Once more, fear accomplished its purpose. The attackers hesitated. Inside the main building, he removed his coat and entered his office. On the desk lay a fresh report. From the safe, the deputy chief had confiscated telephone records from 5 years ago belonging to Gromov himself. Among the voices, a hoarse whisper was distinct. "Let the boy beat the old men. Then they will drink from our hand." Volgin switched off the tape. Plotnikov appeared in the doorway. "Comrade General, the car has been sent for examination. No signs of gunfire." "Good." The general stood up. "Report the numbers." Today, 16 statements about the transfer arrived. They were filed away. After a thorough review, we will consider them. He took a black playing card, snapped it in two, and tossed it into the trash bin. Then he picked up the phone and dialed the minister. The voice answered immediately, as if expecting the call. Volgin said, "The report's head is ready. I will send the courier tomorrow." The minister responded, "I trust you. Maintain silence." Silence can be more terrifying than a scream. The general hung up. There was no tremor in his hands. He approached the window. The city breathed evenly. The moon drifted above the rooftops, but even its cold light seemed to witness something solemn. Time challenged those who lived by old habits. Footsteps sounded outside the door. Senior investigator Savalayev appeared. He reported, "A second unregistered weapons cache has been found outside the city limits, guarded by 3 individuals. Their IDs are fake." The general commanded, "Take a team and arrest them. Document the weapons and interrogate the suspects." "Understood," came the reply. The clock showed 2 o'clock in the morning. Plotnikov brought strong tea. "Add sugar?" The general nodded. The sergeant set down the glass, the delicate sound of a spoon breaking the silence. "Nikolai Andreevich," the general addressed the duty officer, "tomorrow will be a difficult day. Rest for 2 hours in the morning and then switch shifts." "Will do, Comrade General." The files on the table grew as high as palms. The general did not feel tired. He sensed that a new order was being built around him. Harsher, quieter, but more just. At dawn, another report was delivered. On the cover, a clear note read, "Investigative Committee copy, Ministry of Internal Affairs original." Inside was a list of employees who had received bonuses for case resolutions. All the bonuses had gone too. The days when cases were closed without a verdict were over. Martin signed an order to cancel bonuses, recover funds, and reopen the investigations. At the first light of dawn, he leaned back in his chair. The tapping of heels, the rustling of paper tapes, and sharp orders brought the headquarters to life. The general closed his eyes for a moment and imagined an empty shelf in the cabinet. Now it would be filled with evidence of not fear, but truth. At 8 o'clock in the morning, a lieutenant colonel from the financial inspection entered the office. He was shaken like a cadet caught in wrongdoing. He reported, "A secret account has been discovered where voluntary contributions from the junior staff were collected. The funds were transferred to a fictitious sports club, which is registered under the name of Gromov's nephew. "How much money?" the general asked. 4 million rubles over 3 years. Volgin ordered to freeze the accounts and arrest those involved. The inspector left, leaving behind a tense silence. The general called the regional prosecutor and said, "We are preparing materials on the financial part. Please assign a team." The prosecutor replied, "It will be done." Before noon, they brought in Warrant Officer Kizelyov. He acted defiantly, but his eyes were restless. A photo was placed on the table. It showed him handing a canister to a man in plain clothes. Kizelyov was silent for 2 minutes, and then said, "He carried an ID from the supply department but did not give his name. Description? Tall, red-haired, with a scar on his hand." The general turned to investigator Lewis and instructed, "Check which civilian contractors served in the Marine Corps. Look for injuries. Don't forget the scar." The story was becoming a complex knot, every new document tightening it further. The general was in no rush to untangle it. He carefully pulled the threads to reveal everyone involved. By around 3 o'clock, they brought in Gromov. The former deputy chief sat down silently. His hand trembled only when he saw Volgin. The general placed a folder on the table containing the missing weapons and a list of awards. "Is this your signature?" the general asked. "Mine," Gromov whispered. "Did you sign willingly?" "According to the plan." "What plan, exactly?" Silence lasted for a full minute. Then a high-ranking official's name from the capital was mentioned. Volgin was not surprised, but noted it down. "Your only chance is to tell the whole truth," he said. "Silence today costs more than a death sentence." Gromov finally began speaking. His words flowed slowly like thick honey, yet each one struck like a heavy stone. He revealed schemes, lost firearms, soldiers who deserted on their own, rewards for fake crime fighting, top ranks, loud reports, and village orphans. All parts of the same triangle where people, numbers, and fear intertwined. The interrogation lasted for 3 hours. The protocol pages kept piling up. At last, the general said, "That is enough. We will continue tomorrow." Gromov was led away. The corridor was as quiet as a library. Even the floor creaked like a whisper. The general went to the meeting room where the heads of 5 departments waited. He took out a sheet with new appointments and read it in a steady voice. The officer's eyes stayed downcast. Everyone understood there was no turning back. After the meeting ended, the general stayed alone. He shook off invisible dust from the papers, as if brushing off the past years. His heart did not feel joy, but calmness, as if the ship had finally sailed clear of the storm. The search for the reefs had now shifted toward the wide forewater. That evening, a message arrived. "A man with a scar has been found. Citizen Smirnov, a driver for a supply company. He was detained after attempting to flee. 2 canisters and a pack of empty envelopes used for threats were found in his car." During the late-night interrogation, Smirnov revealed he had received orders from Drozdov and Martin to set fire to the archive, intimidate the leadership, and, if necessary, eliminate the general. Each word struck like hail on a rooftop. The general remained calm in his tone. He instructed them to confiscate the phone and check the accounts of Smirnov's relatives. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the direct line at the duty station rang. The voice without a name delivered a message. "You have 24 hours, close the case, and everything will be forgotten. Otherwise, the city will wake up without electricity." The duty officer handed the receiver to General Volgin, who responded, "Your silence is worth less than a single honest signature." He then hung up. The carpenter standing nearby turned pale. The general nodded and said, "Tomorrow we will inspect the substations." He signed yet another order to strengthen security at energy facilities. Colonel Ivanov, responsible for the task, walked the corridors before dawn. The walls were silent. He stopped by the cabinet where 3 folders lay yesterday, and placed a new one inside. The sabotage attempt was documented by Smirnov. The cabinet closed quietly, like a dictionary recording a new word. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. The general turned toward the faint morning light. His shadow fell onto the shelf. The shadow bore no epaulets, no stars, only a man who had chosen a path with no return. The morning began with Protocol Number 1. The Martin case was transferred from administrative to criminal proceedings. The general signed the documents, his signature firm and deliberate. Then he summoned the prosecution's press secretary to draft an official summary for the ministry. It was not meant for the newspapers or broadcasts, but strictly for internal use. At 9 o'clock, Gromov was led into the hearing room, followed by Martin, Drozdov, and 2 other supply officers. The case was heard by a closed panel, no audience allowed. The general took his place at the head of the table. He did not raise his voice, yet each word hit the air sharply. "Lieutenant Martin, do you admit your involvement in the assault of civilians, falsification of reports, and destruction of evidence?" "I admit it," Martin responded. "Do you recognize that you followed orders against regulations and your oath?" "I carried them out without understanding the purpose," Martin said. "The real aim was the personal benefit of your superiors. Are you aware of this?" "I am," he answered. The general then shifted his gaze to Gromov. "Colonel, do you confirm the directive that led to the disappearance of weapons and the closing of cases?" "I confirm," Gromov answered hoarsely. The secretary recorded every word precisely, the page slowly filling with "confirm" and "acknowledge." Next, a report from the Energy Department was presented. During the night, explosive devices were found at 2 city substations. Sappers defused them before dawn. The detonators pointed to a warehouse under Drozdov's control. "Major Naro," the general said, "was this also your plan?" Drozdov lowered his head. "Speak up." "Yes, mine," he admitted. After lunch, investigator Savelyev took the floor. He presented photographs from cassette recordings. On one of the tapes, Martin and 2 others assaulted a teenager for refusing to sign a false confession. A voiceover by Dekche Gromov said, "Let him press harder." The general did not provide any comments, but simply asked for Gromov's signature. The expert examination confirmed the findings. Martin covered his face with his hands. No one offered a handkerchief. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the general signed a report to charge a group of individuals with abuse of power and destruction of evidence related to organizing a criminal group. The document was read aloud. Martin staggered slightly. The general raised his hand, saying, "Sit down, Lieutenant." Then he summoned a personnel officer, ordering an unscheduled review for everyone who had served under Gromov's command. By 6 in the evening, the hall was empty. The accused were taken away. Volgin returned to the office. On the desk lay 2 items, a button and a letter shaped round. He took the letter and placed it on the instruction to deliver it to the widow, along with a certificate of her husband's rehabilitation. The phone rang. The minister tersely stated, "I support this. Prepare a decision to reward the group and dismiss those involved." The general replied, "I will do it." Then he added, "The system is starting to speak." He hung up. By the window, the evening light stood still. Outside, cars moved slowly, as if the city itself were slowing down to listen to what was happening at the headquarters. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the audit results arrived. They seized 340 units of weaponry, 6 million funds in fake accounts, and 87 folders of closed cases. The general signed the report. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. The duty officer reported that one of the guards had attempted to jump out of a window, but was stopped. The reason was fear of people wearing masks who had ambushed him and his family. The general dispatched a squad to the guard's house. His wife and children were moved to a departmental dormitory. The night grew darker. In the office, the scent of paper and lemon balm tea filled the air. The general opened Martin's personal file. A photo of a youthful face appeared along with a letter from a school instructor. It stated he was capable, but emotionally unstable. There was no mention of integrity or courage. He wrote a resolution, a psychological assessment intended for the court. The document felt dry, resembling a draft of a sentence. Late at night, Lewis brought a printout of phone calls between Gromov and an unknown caller. The number belonged to the ministry's legal department. The general ordered a formal request to be made. "But, Comrade General, this is very high level," Lewis whispered quietly. "Higher only than the sky," Volgin replied. They locked eyes with no sentimentality, just clear understanding. Tomorrow, they would have to proceed further. At 2:30 in the morning, the regional prosecutor arrived. He listened to a brief report, signed an order to detain 5 more suspects, and remarked, "In 30 years I have seen much, but never such speed." The general responded, "Speed is necessary while the truth is still warm." At dawn, Volgin walked the corridors once more. The shadows of those working late appeared longer than their bodies. He noticed District Major Shubin clutching a folder marked "Property Restitution." It was a personal assignment for the widow of a fallen policeman. The general nodded quietly. Outside, fog spread along the curbs in silent waves. The glow of the streetlights blurred like faded signals from the past. He felt an unusual calmness. Every person here had a purpose, and it was pure. He returned to his office, took off his Chanel coat, and carefully hung it on the hook. Then he opened his notebook and wrote, "The wall of criminals' isolation will dissolve as soon as the first stone is brought to light." He closed the notebook. The clock showed exactly 3 o'clock. At that moment, a call came through. A courier had been detained. Ammunition was found in the bag. The detainee refused to say who it was meant for. The general ordered no questioning until a lawyer arrived, but insisted on strict guarding. The law is law, even for the enemy. Another hour passed, and the first rays of dawn brightened the sky. The general looked out the window. Above the rooftops glowed a strange pink light, like a new banner over the ancient city. He sighed wearily. The day would begin without secrets. Precisely at 7 o'clock, the door opened. An elderly colonel named Morozov stood on the threshold, one of those previously retired due to age. In his hands was a worn briefcase. "Alex Nichols," he said, "I have kept this for 7 years. It is time to return it." Inside the briefcase were inventory records and tape recordings. The tapes contained conversations between Gromov and the capital's supervisor. Morozov had hidden them out of fear for his family, but now he had come. The general thanked him. He knew these recordings would elevate the case beyond the regional level. Yet his expression remained calm. At 9 o'clock, the capital's prosecutor was summoned via video link. The prosecutor demanded the immediate transfer of the materials. The general responded that he was ready to deliver them personally under armed escort. At 10 o'clock, the team assembled. The villagers boarded the train. The general stayed behind. He understood that today, new assignments would be announced, and silence would become his inheritance. By midday, a disciplinary committee meeting took place. On the table lay 10 files. 7 officers immediately requested resignation without waiting for any questions. The committee approved their requests. The others were given reprimands and ordered to undergo inspections. The formalities concluded as darkness already settled outside. The general knew that tomorrow he would have to sign duty rosters instead of verdicts, yet his mind would not find peace. He stepped into the corridor. On the wall, where an old portrait of the first provincial administration head hung, someone had attached a fresh sheet of paper. It read, "To serve, not to rule," with no signature or stamp. The general took down the note, folded it, and put it in his pocket. No one reacted. At 9 o'clock in the evening, a telegram arrived from the minister. "You are appointed as head of internal security for the district," it declared. The decision became official. At that very moment, fingerprint analysis results were delivered. Prints found on explosive devices belonged to Drozdov and Gromov. The evidence closed the case. Volgin opened his safe and took out a small wooden box containing an old medal for bravery. He placed it on the table beside a button from Sasha Shena, a symbol of the recent threat. Two objects lay side by side, serving as a reminder: courage and cowardice, two sides of the same coin. Just before midnight, Savelyev came in holding a protocol of Drozdov's voluntary confession. The major had agreed to cooperate. They decided to cooperate and labeled the capital's protectors with a surname. The first name on the list was known throughout the country. "This burden is heavy," Savelyev said. "But we will lift it," the general replied. The night slipped by like the shadow of a great wheel. At dawn, Volgin completed the report. "I request approval for a comprehensive inspection plan of the ministry's departments," he signed without trembling. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the sound of a helicopter was heard. A heavy safe was lifted from the roof. It was to be delivered to Moscow. Inside the safe were 200 records and 300 signatures. The night wind stirred the papers on the desk. The general caught a sheet and pressed it down with his palm. He recalled the first step: a boot striking in court, scattering the papers. From that strike, a crack appeared, and the system began to break apart like old ice. The general turned on the desk lamp. The case lists lit up like a map of unknown paths. He told himself, "Only one step remains." At 6 o'clock in the morning, the courtroom where it all began opened its doors again. Martin sat on the defendant's bench. His hands trembled. The courtroom held no audience, only the judge, the secretary, and the general as a victim. The judge asked, "Defendant, do you wish to say your final words?" Martin looked up at Volgin. "I followed the plan. I did not know these were real people." His voice broke. The general remained still. In those words, he saw emptiness. The plan, like a fragile fence, collapsed when faced with the first truth. The judge ordered detention until the trial. 2 weeks were given to gather evidence. The courtroom emptied. The general stepped outside into the fresh morning sky. The air was pristine, as if the city wished to erase yesterday's smoke from memory. He inhaled deeply and realized the fall was over, yet a long road to recovery stretched ahead. He settled into a car without flashing lights and instructed the driver to proceed slowly. The city slipped past the windows with its aged buildings, factory chimneys, and a schoolyard where boys were kicking a ball. The general thought, "If truth does not come here, the ball will keep rolling along the same sidewalks, but the hearts will remain empty." The car halted beside a modest monument dedicated to a policeman who had died in the line of duty. The general stepped out and removed his cap. He placed a button and a letter from the round table inside, then carefully took a medal from his pocket and laid it against the granite. He stood silently. The shadows of trees swayed with the breeze, and the rustling leaves sounded like voices of those waiting for justice. After a minute, he returned to the car. "To headquarters," he said quietly. The journey back felt shorter. As they arrived, the sun had climbed above the rooftops. The general glanced once more at the sky, its hue matching the day he was called to service in the army. He knew tomorrow would bring a new order, new inspections, new conversations, and subtle victories ahead. General Alex Nichols Volgin entered his office as though for the last time. The sunlight flooded the room evenly, yet he did not notice the beauty. 2 documents awaited him on the desk: an order appointing a new investigator for all reopened cases and a plan for official inspections for the next 6 months. He sat down, retrieved a pen, straightened a line in the orders, and signed without hesitation. The paper lay firm beneath his hand. It was as if the ink accepted gratefully. For many years she had concealed the falsehood. Now she absorbed the truth. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. The old sergeant appeared, the very same Nikolai Andreevich. In his hands, he held a tunic. "Comrade General, permission, please. The owner of this button has been found." The general nodded. The tunic had belonged to Warrant Officer McKeeve, who had died on a mission 5 years ago. His uniform had been written off, yet the button had surfaced. Volgin took the tunic and noticed where a button was missing. He pulled the trophy from his pocket and fastened it. Everything fit. "Let the tunic return to the Makiv family," he said. "Tell them the honor is restored." The sergeant left. The general pondered. Every detail, even a broken button, has its place when the truth comes back. On the desk lay a fresh report. Widow Kurochkin had received documents about her husband's rehabilitation and an insurance payment. A simple piece of paper, but it was as heavy as a stone lifted from the soul. Then Savelyev entered with a thick folder in his hands. "Here are all the cases that were once off limits to the public. Now they are ready for trial." "Thank you," Volgin whispered. "The people are watching. Let Alex Nichols Volgin watch in silence. Our matter is order." Savelyev left. The general rose and took the folder marked "Recover." It was nearly empty. Nearby stood a new pile labeled "Transferred to Court." He placed both next to each other, the past and the present. The clock struck 11. The door opened. A young investigator entered, the one appointed yesterday. He stood at attention and spoke firmly. "Comrade General, I accept the cases." "Work well, Major Smolin. Remember, every detail matters. The surname inside represents a living person and his pain." "I understand." The major left, carrying some folders. The general approached the window overlooking the courtyard of the headquarters. The rules of leadership applied to management as someone led an ordinary life. Soldiers were loading crates. An orchestra was rehearsing a march for the fire brigade celebration. 2 young cadets were debating about the marching formation. There was no noise, only the steady rhythm of service. He returned to his desk and took out an old notebook from the drawer. On the first page, there were dates marking his service. The academy, the 1st platoon, a mission to the mountains, a wound, recovery, the war, then a new appointment. On the last page, a blank square remained. He wrote, "One chapter ends, another begins." At 12 o'clock, the minister entered the office without any entourage or papers, simply shaking his hand. "Alex Nichols," he said, "the job is done. Things will move forward. You deserve rest." The general replied, "I am still needed." Needed, but in a different role. "We are establishing an inspection unit under the Security Council. Will you lead it?" He did not smile, only nodded. "I will sign the order tonight," the minister added. "For now, thank your team." The minister left. The general removed his cap and looked at it as if it were an old comrade. He placed it on the desk. The polished visor spoke volumes. He straightened up and stepped into the corridor. The auditorium was already filled with officers, investigators, operatives, duty officers, and secretaries. There was no musical accompaniment or grand speeches. The general stepped onto the stage and said, "Comrades, I thank you. Together, we have returned the system to its true purpose, to serve the people. I will not use grand words." The work continued. But remember, a silent command speaks louder than any slogan. He stepped down from the stage. The crowd was quiet because they understood there was nothing more to say. After lunch, he returned to his office, took off his jacket, hung it up neatly, and put on a civilian suit. On the desk, he left a note. "The affairs have been handed over. Smolin is in charge now." He took an empty folder, signed it to restore, and placed a clean sheet inside. Then he closed the cabinet. The key remained in the lock. He picked up the phone. "Nikolai Andreevich, arrange a car to the train station." As you command." He grabbed his old bag, the same one where he once kept a dry ration and a map. Now he put in a notebook and a pen. On his way out, he met the duty officer. "Comrade General, which orders should we prioritize?" "Read by dates, the oldest ones first." The officer nodded. The general walked down the corridor. The walls seemed brighter. He realized there was no longer an echo of fear within these walls. Outside, a black Volga was waiting. The driver opened the door. The general got in. The car moved smoothly. Passing through the city, he observed people carrying bags, an elderly man reading a newspaper on a bench, and a boy helping his mother carry a bucket. A quiet life for which he had signed nighttime papers. At the station, he got out and handed the driver an envelope. "Get the guy some tea." The driver bowed. The general entered the waiting hall. In his pocket was a ticket to the City of Youth, where his parents' wooden house stood. He turned and saw a headline displayed in the newspaper kiosk window. "The department is purging its ranks." He looked away. On the platform, the train was knocking. The general lifted his bag, but paused. He recalled the empty folder labeled "Restore." It felt wrong to leave it blank. He returned to the station master's desk, asked for a sheet of paper, and wrote, "If even one forgotten pain is found, return it to those who can heal it." He folded the paper, placed it inside the folder, and put the folder into his bag. The train gave a whistle. The general stepped into the compartment, found the cubicle, and sat by the window. The carriages touched the rails and slowly began to move. Outside, the city faded away. Houses flashed past, like pages turning in a book. He thought, "Truly, this road is endless. The most important thing is to take the first step and never stop." The air smelled of coal smoke and fresh wood from the sleepers. The general closed his eyes. The rhythmic sound of the wheels echoed in his ears. He smiled in the way a soldier does after completing an order. An hour later, the conductor walked down the corridor and peeked inside the compartment. The general was dozing. On his lap lay the Restore folder. It was the only folder on the train with just one clean sheet inside, a symbol of the chance to begin again if needed. The pounding of the wheels assured that the journey would be long, but steady. Next to him sat a woman wearing a headscarf who was knitting gloves. She glanced at him. "Are you traveling far, kind sir?" she asked. "Home," he replied. She nodded, as if understanding more than her words conveyed. "It is good to return when the task is done." He did not explain further, but his heart responded. The train turned toward Lesnaya station and stopped. A young soldier appeared in the doorway clutching a sack of letters. As he passed, he stumbled, and the letters scattered. The general rose and helped gather them up. The soldier did not recognize him but said, "Thank you, father." "Serve honestly," the general whispered softly. After 5 minutes, the train started moving again. The woman finished knitting the glove and handed him a gift. "I have plenty of yarn. It will come in handy for you." He accepted it. A simple woolen item seemed like a token of honor. Night approached. Stars outside the window twinkled like tiny flames from lamps along a distant road. The general stood up and closed the curtain to block the draft. Silence filled the compartment. He opened his notebooks and wrote, "Every order from Masevich Masha is a seed. If you sow evil, tears will grow. If you sow honor, wings will grow." He closed the notebook and put it in his pocket. In the early morning, the conductor woke him up. The station was the last stop. The general stepped out. The platform smelled of damp earth. His parents' wooden house stood 3 kilometers away. He walked along the country road while the east was glowing with the birth of a new sun. The bag felt light. Inside was a single folder and a pair of gloves. That was all that remained from those hard days. He stopped by the porch and pushed the gate. On the windowsill stood his mother's old geranium next to a new mailbox carefully nailed in place. He sighed. Life goes on. He opened the door. The house greeted him with the soft creak of the floorboards. On the walls hung clocks, ticking at their own pace, as if they ignored the storms of the vast world outside. The general took off his coat, hung it on a rack, placed the bag down, took a sheet from the folder, laid it on the kitchen table, picked up a pen, and wrote a single sentence. "From this moment, I am simply the son of my father, the keeper of his memory." He put the pen aside, and morning light poured through the window. The words on the table seemed to glow. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he realized that silence had finally become his ally. He shut the folder and placed it on the shelf next to his father's book about the honor of an officer. The pages rustled softly as if they agreed. In the evening, he stepped outside into the yard and sat on a bench. The sun was setting. Dogs were barking in the distance, and the scent of grass filled the air. He remembered the glowing lamps in the headquarters, the whispering of documents, and the trembling fingers of Martin. Then his thoughts drifted to the eyes of Widow Krugli, the steady footsteps of Savelyev, and the quiet voice of the sergeant. Far away in the city, inspections continued, but now someone was there to carry on. He raised his hand and looked at the line of his heart. It ran straight without any breaks. A smile spread across his face. The sky darkened, and the first star appeared in the east. He softly said, "Now there is silence." Night fell without fear. A week later, another report was underway at the city administration. New officers appointed to the places of the dismissed worked quietly. Major Smolin sent brief telegrams every day. The Krugli case had reached the judicial stage. 8 new episodes related to weapons charges had been initiated. Gromov was ready to testify in the capital. One morning, Smolin found a parcel on his desk. Inside was an old award book belonging to General Volgin, along with a short note that read, "Make sure this book does not gather dust." Smolin smiled. He understood that responsibility was not a burden, but an honor. He lifted the receiver and called the inspection at the Security Council. The secretary connected him quickly. "Alex Nichols," said Smolin. "I am listening. Your words are working. We are closing the 3rd episode. The evidence, ironclad. Good job. Keep going. I give you my word." The general ended the call. In the inspection room, a map of the country hung on the wall. Green pins indicated the regions where audits had started. The map was turning green like a field soaked by rain. The general moved closer and added another pin. At that moment, he was not thinking about ranks or medals. His thoughts were with the boy at the station who said, "Thank you, Father." That gratitude alone made the long night signing orders worthwhile. Outside the windows of the inspection office, the vines rustled in the autumn breeze. A fallen leaf landed on the windowsill. The general picked it up and handed it to Savelyev, who had just arrived on a business trip. "The leaf falls, but the tree remains. Let our work be like that tree." Savelyev nodded thoughtfully. Meanwhile, in a distant village, the widow of Kruglov received a call inviting her to a ceremony awarding her late husband a posthumous medal. The woman wept not from sorrow, but because finally the world had heard her quiet voice. That evening, the general walked along the Moscow embankment. The Volga flowed calmly, and lights shimmered on the opposite bank. He remembered how the boy had crossed the river on a ferry, dreaming of becoming an officer. He took a new button from his inspection coat pocket, looked at the reflection of the lights, and threw the button into the water. The button sank, but ripples spread across the water's surface. "Let the ripples spread," said the general. "Let the truth spread just the same." He turned and walked on along the embankment. The late tram jingled. The ice cream vendor was packing her cart, and an old accordion player gathered coins. Everything was as it should be. Just like many years ago, everything had changed because a single quiet command shattered the old locks. Within this routine lay the greatest victory. The world was governed once more by the clock of conscience rather than the whistle of fear. The next morning, a telegram arrived from the capital. Inspection passed. The course approved. Volgin smiled for the first time in many months. He stepped onto the building's porch and breathed in the autumn air. Leaves rustled beneath his feet like whispers of gratitude. Suddenly, a young courier girl approached and handed him a small package. Inside was a badge inscribed with "For Faith and Truth." No signature, no address. The general understood it as a symbol of nameless appreciation from those who had witnessed the changes. He fastened the badge inside his pocket and softly said, "This is heavier than a medal." Raising his eyes to the sky, where clouds drifted, he declared, "Let the journey continue," then stepped down the stairs into a new day filled with ordinary tasks, each choice a small branch of the vast tree of truth.